Chapter 7, Homicidal Kittens. Kids View didn't start until 11, but Benji and Ellen Louise were at the studio by 10, poring over some last-minute details. Ellen Louise was examining Mr. Whitehead's list of prizes for the quiz. "Well, he did it to us again," she announced. "Flea collar, turtle food, poop scoop, lizard vitamins. Here's something new. One of those little plastic divers that you stick in your fish tank." Benji groaned. "I feel like such an idiot giving that junk away on the radio. I wish we could cut off the phone callers after they answer the questions and tell them that they've won when no one else is listening." Ellen Louise shook her head. "Mr. Whitehead wants the whole thing to be on the air." "Mr. Whitehead wouldn't know good journalism if it snuck up and kicked him in the behind," said Benji. "I wish I knew how to handle this. Eldridge Kestenbaum never did a quiz show." The door opened and Mark breezed in. "Hey, guys." "Hi," said Benji. He did not look up from copying Miss P's independent research assignment onto the question cards. "How's the bird?" "What bird?" "Winston Churchill," exclaimed Ellen Louise. "Don't tell me you left him at home." Mark flushed. "I forgot to take him home. He's still at our animal friends." Benji looked up in horror. "But you were supposed to teach him how not to say, 'This parrot is a ripoff.'" Mark shrugged. "It's been a week. Maybe he forgot on his own." Benji leaped to his feet. "You jerk. If that parrot doesn't say something normal, nobody'll buy him, and we'll be stuck with him forever." "Well, it's too late to do anything now," said Ellen Louise reasonably. "No, it's not," cried Benji. "The mascot of the week doesn't come on till 11:45. He clamped his hands down on Mark's shoulders, wheeled him around, and pushed him toward the door. "Get over to the store, get the bird, and get back here. Play him a recording over and over again until he starts talking properly." Breathlessly, Mark ran out the door. Benji was sweating as Murph sat Brad Jaworski down at the guest broadcast desk and positioned the microphone. Mouth level for Brad would have missed the top of Benji's head by at least 2 inches. This was stupid, Benji told himself. Eldridge Kestenbaum would never be terrified of a guest. Of course not. 15 seconds, guys, warned Murph as he trotted back to the control room. On the air, Mr. Whitehead's taped voice was raving about our animal friends. Benji wasn't listening to the commercial. In his mind, he was practicing saying Jaworski over and over again. Jaworski, 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 Jaworski. He looked to the control room. Where was Mark with the parrot? That coward Havermeyer had taken off on them just so he wouldn't have to be in the studio at the same time as Brad Jaworski. Ellen Louise was there, sitting at a small desk, absently making changes in her script. Sure, what did she care that Mark had turned traitor? The mascot of the week was missing, and the most dangerous kid in Centennial Park School was sitting 4 feet away from Benji. And Mr. Morenz was reading Waterworld Aqua, Book 2. He had finished Book 1 during Mrs. Appleton's junior kindergarten rhythm band. Jaworski, 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 Jaworski. The commercial ended, and the on-air light popped on in the studio. Benji faced the microphone and panicked. Remembering only his constant practice, he blurted out, "Our next guest is Jaworski." "That's Brad," roared the big boy in outrage. Benji let out an audible gasp. He didn't want to leave dead air, but the only sentence forming in his mind was, "Please don't hit me." After all his planning, he had offended the Venice Menace. He stammered out, "Take it away, Brad," and slumped back in his seat. Brad shot him a dirty look and turned his attention to the microphone. "I've written a story called The Adventures of Fuzzy and Puffy," he said defiantly. "Got it?" "Fuzzy and Puffy?" Murph repeated in the control room. "Isn't this the tough guy everyone's so afraid of?" "Fuzzy and Puffy," read Brad, "were 2 kittens who were the best friends in the whole world. Fuzzy was called Fuzzy because he was fuzzier than Puffy. Puffy was called Puffy because he was puffier than Fuzzy. Got it?" Benji's jaw dropped. This was the writing of Brad Jaworski. Fuzzy and Puffy, kittens. Even Ellen Louise looked away from her script and stared into the studio. In the waiting room, there was a stampede for the little window in the door. Many pairs of eyes peered through at the guest broadcast desk. One day, continued the Venice Menace, Puffy came across Fuzzy playing with a ball of yarn. Where did you get that? Asked Puffy. Sister Agnes Clare gave it to me, said Fuzzy. It looks like fun, said Puffy. It sure is, said Fuzzy. Can I play with it too? Asked Puffy. No, said Fuzzy. Why not? Asked Puffy. Because it's mine, said Fuzzy. I've got an idea, said Puffy. Why don't we break it right down the middle so we'll each have a nice little ball of yarn to play with? Forget it, said Fuzzy. This is my ball of yarn. Sister Agnes Clare gave it to me, so tough darts on you. Got it? Come on, said Puffy. Quit being such a jerk and fork over some of that yarn. No way, pig face. It's mine, said Fuzzy. Now beat it. By this time, Benji's mouth was open wide enough to catch a baseball. All eyes were on the boy in the skull and crossbones jacket. In the waiting room, there was a battle royal for gawking space at the window. So Puffy said, Fuzzy, you stupid moron, give me that yarn or start writing your will. Go chase a sick mouse, said Fuzzy. All right, you traitor. That does it, roared Puffy. I'm going to bust your head into a billion pieces and sell your guts to a violin string factory, you mangy hunk of stale dog food. And then Fuzzy pushed the ball of yarn toward Puffy and said, Here, you can have it. I'm bored with it now. And Puffy said, I don't want it either. I don't want anything that will interfere with our friendship because we're the best friends in the whole world. And they went off together to share some catnip. The end. Brad sat back, folded his arms in front of him, and stuck his jaw out. Benji was speechless, but the broadcaster in him couldn't leave dead air, and what that person was saying appalled even him. He was heaping praise on the author of The Adventures of Fuzzy and Puffy. Brad, that was just fantastic. No wonder your teacher wanted you to read it on the air. Exciting, heartwarming, a lesson for us all. Wow. In the waiting room, hysteria reigned. It was the biggest laugh of the school year that the Venice Menace had just read on the air the dumbest story of all time. From the 5-year-old rhythm band members to other 6th graders from Brad's class, they laughed. Some of the older boys who had been terrified of Brad for years were doubled over with mirth, tears streaming down their cheeks. Through the roar, the names Fuzzy and Puffy were being crowed from joyful throats. Then the door opened, and Brad emerged from the studio. The laughter and jeers died instantly, as though someone had pulled the plug. Brad looked over at the group and issued his challenge. Well, how'd you like it? There was a breathless silence. The boy who had laughed the loudest spoke up. I loved it. It was just great. You're a really good writer. And then, like the breaking of a dam, the compliments poured from the group. Awesome. Fabulous. You've got talent. Excellent. Best story I've ever heard. Brad accepted all this with a stony-faced grunt. He folded up his story and crammed it into the back pocket of his jeans. Then he took one last threatening scowl around the room and walked out the door to the parking lot. On the air, Arthur Katz was in high gear, screaming about what would happen if the law of gravity suddenly stopped working. Benji, meanwhile, was having a panic attack of his own. Mark still hadn't returned with Winston Churchill. He checked the studio clock, 11:15. After Arthur came Ellen Louise's school news, and then the mascot of the week. "Can you picture it?" Arthur was saying. "Everything floating around, heading for outer space. People, cars, manhole covers. And not just little things either. The entire Pacific Ocean would just lift out, fish and all. You could drown before you even left the stratosphere." He pounded the desk. "We need a gravity machine." "Sure, I know. They haven't been invented yet. Get on the ball, people. We'll never know how much we need one until it's too late." "Thank you, Arthur Katz, for another fascinating—" "I'm not finished," thundered Arthur. "Yes, you are," said Benji, signaling to Murph for a commercial. One came on. Before Arthur could put up a fuss, Benji leaped out from behind the microphone and darted to the control room. "That's it!" he roared into the startled face of Ellen Louise. "Havermayer's dead. Dead. I'll kill that traitor." She was mystified. "But why?" "Why? We sent him to get the bird, and he disappeared off the face of the earth. We have no mascot of the week. Mr. Whitehead have a fit." "You're the one who's having a fit," said Ellen Louise coldly. "Mark has been here all along. He's in Studio B, working with Winston Churchill." "Oh." Benji flushed with embarrassment. He peered through the soundproof glass into the station's second studio. Sure enough, there was Mark, lounging in a leather swivel chair. On the table in front of him sat Winston Churchill. A giant pair of headphones was clamped onto the cage, and the parrot was looking thoughtful and seemed to be listening. "You ought to be ashamed of yourself, Benji Driver," said Ellen Louise sternly. "Mark is our best friend. He wouldn't let us down." Benji shuffled uncomfortably. "Sorry," he mumbled, "but it's been a rough show. I wasn't exactly expecting the adventures of Fuzzy and Puffy, you know?" She nodded understandingly. "Wasn't that weird? I mean, coming from him?" "Okay, Ellen," called Murph. "School news in 15 seconds. Benji stayed in the control room to calm his nerves as Ellen Louise went on the air. She was giving the highlights of the third grade spelling bee when the door to Studio B opened and Mark's head poked through. "Has the big yawn started yet?" "Yeah, she's on now," said Benji. "How's the parrot? Is he talking?" "Well, not yet," replied Mark. "But he's not saying this parrot is a ripoff either, so that's a good sign. He looks like he's picking up something. Hey, how was the Venice Menace?" "Don't ask," Benji groaned. "What was his story about?" "Kittens," supplied Murph. "Homicidal kittens." School news went on without incident until two kindergarten rhythm band members burst in from the waiting room, triangles tinging, to do an uninvited encore. Benji and Mark had to storm the studio and herd the two 5-year-olds off the scene. By this time, Ellen Louise was well into listing next week's hall monitors, so it was time to get Winston Churchill ready for the mascot of the week. There was no commercial, so Mark was careful to be quiet as he set the cage down in front of the guest microphone. As Ellen Louise said goodbye, Benji looked over at the cage and breathed a silent prayer that this would be the last time he'd ever have to set eyes on the orange and green feathers of Winston Churchill. "Thank you, Ellen Louise Turnbull. And now, Kids View is pleased to present the one and only Winston Churchill, the talking parrot, back once again for a record-breaking third appearance as our mascot of the week." He turned imploring eyes on the bird. "Well, what do you have to say this week, Winston?" Winston Churchill cocked his head and almost frowned. His feathers ruffled, his eyes bulged, and his talons tightened on his perch. With a low squawk, he announced, "Bonjour, mademoiselle. Vous êtes très jolie." In the control room, Murph sat bolt upright. "That's French! It spoke French!" Ellen Louise was overjoyed. "Oh, bravo, Winston. Clever bird." Murph stared at Mark. How did he learn that? Mark looked worried. "I play him a recording, like Benji said." "Which recording?" Mark shrugged. I don't know. It was already in the stereo. 3 pairs of eyes traveled to the Studio B stereo. In it was a cassette marked Learn French Today. On the air, Benji was still trying to squeeze some words out of his guest. Since he understood no French, he was hearing only nonsense sounds. Come on now, Winston, he said jovially. Don't mumble for the folks. Say something. Beak quivering, the parrot inquired. Voulez-vous un café? Oh, I get it, blurted out Benji in agony. He speaks French, boomed Mark's voice over the control room intercom. Well, that's just marvelous, Benji raved glibly. I knew he was a great talker, but I didn't know he spoke French too. So come on over to Our Animal Friends and practice your French with Winston Churchill, the genius talking parrot. Say goodbye to the people, Winston. This parrot is a ripoff. Benji looked stricken. For one wild moment, he found himself hoping that gravity would shut off so he could just float away up there with the Pacific Ocean and the manhole covers. Kids View will be back in a moment with our weekly trivia quiz. Stay tuned to 92.5. He managed and dropped his head down onto the desk.